Okay, so welcome everyone to our Sport and Gender Equity at Griffith seminar. This is our first for 2024, so hopefully we'll have a few more coming up. We do have a book launch next month of our research fellow, Dr. Georgia Munro-Cook, and her book on the women's NBA and gender relations, so that will be really exciting as well. We will start, as usual, with an acknowledgement of country. So Griffith University acknowledges the traditional custodians on the land on which we're meeting and pays respects to the elders past, present, and extends that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here. And if there's any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here, that extends to you as well. I'm on the land of the Yomambere language people here, and I'm always grateful to be welcomed here. So you're welcome to put in the chat where you are and yeah, to have your acknowledgement as well. Just some general housekeeping. Please keep your microphone on mute so that we can avoid background noise. There will be time for questions at the end. Please use the chat. You can also use the hands up function. We do have quite a few people, so we might not get around to everybody, but I will do my best to moderate. And please use respectful and inclusive language. We don't tolerate any abuse. So I'm really excited for today's session. I think we're bringing together two very different perspectives to talk about gender diversity in sport from a sports science background and social work lived experience. So we have Dr. Sarah Alexander from Deakin University and Jack from Rainbow Affinity. We're going to start first just with each of them introducing themselves, and then they will each do a short talk, and then we'll have time for some Q&A. So I'll stop sharing, and we'll start with Sarah to introduce herself.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thanks for the introduction, Adele. So I am Sarah Alexander. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute in Melbourne. But today I'm going to be primarily talking about work that I did during my PhD, which was at Deakin University. My background is exercise science, but I look at everything. I'm a physiologist, so I look at everything through a physiological lens, if you like, and I've always had a big passion for sport as well, which is how I guess I kind of got into this area.
Thanks so much for joining us. And I will hand over to Jack, who will introduce himself.
Thanks, Adele. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Jack. My pronouns are he, they. I'm a proud transgender man, also a social worker. I work with young people and adults who identify as LGBTIQ+, in the Brisbane and Gold Coast region, providing individual counselling support. I've worked primarily in the drug and alcohol sector for over 10 years. That's also an area that I'm very passionate about. But I'm also someone who has a lived experience of sport as being a very much a protective factor, and we'll be able to share some insights on my lived experience, but also some of the, I suppose, narratives that I've heard from some of the folk that I work alongside, and how it can be a protective factor for them also being included into sports. Yeah, so really happy to be part of this. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much, Jack. We really appreciate it. I can see we've got a lot of people here today to welcome you both. So we'll start with Sarah, who's going to give us some of her PhD research, where her findings, you know, kind of are working towards debunking some of the myths. We don't, you know, we still don't know so much when it comes to sex and gender. So it's wonderful to see physiologists like Sarah doing important work in this area. So I will turn my mic off Do you have slides to share, Sarah, or?
Yeah, they should be coming up now. Can you see my slides?
No, just our screen. Maybe it's the wrong screen.
Give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
Is it working now?
Yes, wonderful.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, so once again, thank you very much for having me. My pronouns are she, her, identify as a woman. And I wanted to also add my acknowledgement of country. So I'm currently on the Boonwurrung, the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on today are the Boonwurrung people of the Yalukut Wheelan clan. And I extend my respects to any elders past, present and emerging. I also want to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So as Adele mentioned, I'm going to be talking about work for my PhD. I've also worked in with transgender populations after I finished my PhD. So the first half of my talk today is going to be around the current state of play in terms of inclusion of the transgender community into sport. The second half of my talk is going to be my PhD thesis, or the findings of my PhD thesis, which are more centred around cisgender females and a specific population of cisgender females in sport as well. So as I alluded to, I am a physiologist. So I do look at the physiology behind the regulations that we currently have. So today, especially as someone whose area of expertise is in the role of how our sex hormones regulate muscle and athletic performance, that is how I'm approaching this subject today. So I'm going to be using words and terms very, very consciously today, and this is in line with the current sex and gender equity in research guidelines. So if I talk about the sex of an individual, I am going to be referring to their biology, or the set of biological attributes that is associated with their physical and physiological features. So this includes their chromosome makeup, their genetic expression, their hormones, but also the way the hormones function in the body. So the same hormone can work quite differently in males and females. This is also referred to as gender assumed at birth. And when I refer to a male or female, I'm going to be referring to their sex or their gender assumed at birth. On the other hand, if I refer to someone's gender, gender is a social construct that reflects how an individual identifies, and this doesn't necessarily always reflect their sex. So if I'm talking about a man, woman, non-binary, gender diverse, I'm going to be referring to someone's gender. So I'm going to be focusing my talk around testosterone today. That is my area of research, and today I'm going to be trying to explain why testosterone seems to be the centre of the discussion when we talk about sex and gender in sport. So testosterone is the major male sex hormone. It belongs to the androgen family of hormones. Androgen literally means male making. But testosterone is also present in females, just at much, much lower concentrations, but it does play really important roles in reproductive and non-reproductive systems. So this is just a figure from the UK Biobank. This is just showing testosterone concentrations in the population. So this is in nearly 500,000 people in the UK Biobank. And you can see that we have two quite distinct peaks. And if we were to look at this and make a gross generalization, we would say that these two peaks show our female concentrations, which is that lower peak, and our male concentrations, which is the higher peak of testosterone. So you can see that we do have these very different levels between males and females. But why is testosterone the centre of these discussions? Well, there are a few things that kind of underpin this dogma. So males are typically taller, stronger, faster, have more relative muscle mass than females, and less relative fat mass. These are all things that contribute to athletic performance. Males also typically have a 10 to 12% advantage over females in sport. And if you look at world records from virtually any athletic event, you will see that there's this difference in performance. This does range from 5 to 20% based on which sport you're looking at. But these differences also really only become apparent after puberty. So we also know that testosterone is performance enhancing when you dope. So anabolic steroids, which is testosterone or a derivative of testosterone, are performance enhancing, and they are banned by the World Anti-Doping Agency for a very good reason. So these facts are kind of what is underpinning this thought that testosterone is directly determining how someone can perform athletically. But is it? Is it actually a direct determinant of athletic performance? And my research is suggesting that this relationship is probably a little bit more complicated than simply saying the more testosterone you have, the bigger, stronger, and more powerful your muscles actually are. So for the part of my presentation talking about transgender athletes, there are a few more definitions that we should be across. So if I refer to someone as cisgender, this refers to an individual whose gender identity aligns with that presumed at birth, whereas transgender is an umbrella term for individuals with a gender identity different to that presumed at birth. Some transgender individuals will undergo gender affirmation hormone therapy, or GAT, which is the administration of hormones to align their sex hormone concentrations and their phenotype, or their physical appearance, with gender identity. And this could be either masculinizing, where someone will take testosterone, or feminizing, where someone will take estrogen, which is the major female hormone, and potentially testosterone blockers as well. So these are just some. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but this is just some transgender athletes that you may know of. So Laurel Hubbard was the first transgender woman to compete. She was competing in the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. This is a busy slide, and the point of this slide is not for you to go through and read all the information. This is just showing you the 5 probably main sporting bodies in Australia, and certainly World Athletics, International Cycling and FINA, which is swimming, are probably 3 of the biggest sporting corporations in the world. And it's just showing you, I think, the few themes that I want to get out of this slide are A, it changes sport to sport. B, it's really complicated, but also C, if we look at especially the regulations regarding trans women, that we're looking mainly at, again, testosterone, and the focus is mainly on getting someone's testosterone to that of a typical female concentration and maintaining that for a period of 1 or 2 years. Swimming regulations are really quite complicated. They have a number of different kind of tick boxes to go through, whereas trans men are typically free to compete in contact sports. So in rugby, often you have to kind of show your physical capability, but that is largely based on safety. So what does the evidence say to actually support or refute these regulations? I'm just going to put up these 2 review articles. These review articles are written by a group that I worked with in Melbourne. So Ada Chung, who appears on both of these, is a world-leading endocrinologist in gender affirmation care. She's also a researcher out of Melbourne Uni. And this is the group that I did a lot of work with. These 2 reviews are excellent, and they do a really good job of summarising the current evidence that we have available to us. the main theme to come out of these reviews is that we have limited evidence. So most, not all, but most of the evidence is coming from cross-sectional studies where you simply take a snapshot in time and you're comparing transgender women to cisgender women and cisgender men. You're not actually following someone across time. There's often a lack of control for confounding variables that may be affecting the relationship between hormones and muscle. Often they use limited measures. So they might use something like hand grip strength as a proxy for whole body strength, which isn't a perfect measure. And they use mostly athletic populations, which then they generalize to athletes, which again isn't ideal. However, in saying that, just because evidence is limited doesn't necessarily mean it's of a poor quality. It's the best we have at the moment. It just means we need more of it. We need to do more research in this space. So on that note, the last thing I'm going to talk on this subject is just about a study that is ongoing. It's a beautiful example of the type of research we do need more of. And this was a study I was involved with last year. It's called the GAME study. This paper here is the protocol. So if you're interested in the protocol of it, please go and read this paper. The results aren't released yet as it is still an ongoing study. So very quickly, what happened we're looking at transgender individuals. So about a week before these people went onto gender affirmation hormone therapy, they'd often come in with the prescription. So as soon as they were done with our testing, they'd go and get their scripts filled. Before they started hormones, we did aerobic capacity testing or a VO2 peak test. We did muscle strength testing. We did body composition, took muscle biopsies and bloods. Then they went away, started hormone therapy. Then after 6 and 12 months of hormone therapy, we would redo exactly the same measures. The reason we followed them for 12 months is because this is the period of time we'd expect to see the largest changes in these measures with GAT. What makes this study pretty unique is that we had this comparator group of people not taking hormones. So this could be trans folk who weren't taking hormones or cisgender folk as well, but they were all matched in age to the intervention group. So we got a really nice comparison there as well, which again adds a lot of weight to studies like this. So the second half of my talk is now going to be focusing on the findings of my PhD. So my PhD was looking at the role of testosterone in muscle in premenopausal cisgender females and how that also has relatively large implications for sport as well. So these athletes, again, it's not an exhaustive list, but these athletes are probably the most well-known in this space because they've been the most vocal about it, especially Caster Semenya from South Africa. So these athletes are some among many who are currently banned from competing in any event in world athletics. This is based on their naturally elevated testosterone concentrations. So they're not doping, they haven't done anything wrong. There's simply something in their physiology that means their testosterone is naturally elevated and they're banned from competing. And World Athletics says that they have to medically or surgically lower their testosterone levels to, again, that magic 2.5 nanomole per litre cutoff, which is the upper limit of typical female levels, if they want to compete in any event in the female category of sport. Again, the premise for this is that testosterone is a direct determinant of athletic performance. So I showed you this figure before and I said, yep, okay, we've got our female peak and our male peak. I told you a little fib because actually it's going to look more like this. This figure isn't mine, but I do think it really nicely demonstrates the complexity of trying to use testosterone as the sole marker for someone's sex. So the pink bars are female, the blue bars are males, And this is the lower end of that same graph, essentially. But I hope it's obvious to you that there's no point on this graph above which there are only male blue bars, or below which there are only pink female bars. So what I want everyone to do is look at this graph and take a second and think about where you would put the line to determine how female someone is, based only on this information about their testosterone concentrations. Because World Athletics has currently put the line here. So theoretically, every pink bar to the right of that black line shouldn't be competing, which that's a frequency curve. So if you looked at all those, like added up all those people, that's quite a significant number of athletes. So we thought, okay, we have to try and do something about this. So I was looking to answer the question whether naturally occurring testosterone is a direct determinant of muscle mass, strength, or their ability to adapt to resistance training in premenopausal females. The first thing I did was look to the literature to see, okay, what is the current evidence to support this? And we found there's very, very little evidence in this space. The evidence body is very limited. But what we did find was consistently there is no relationship between total testosterone and muscle mass or muscle function in females. But again, very limited. So I thought, let's try and fill that gap a little bit. So the next thing I did was a cross-sectional study using a secondhand data set. This is the largest cohort in this area. So I was looking at over 700 females. The next closest study, I think, had less than 100. So we're looking at a really large cohort of people. And then, we tried to find associations, again, between testosterone, muscle mass, and hand grip strength, with the caveat that I've already told you, hand grip strength is not a perfect proxy, but it was what was available to us. And we controlled for important measures, so things like protein intake, which we know is going to influence muscle mass. And in this study, we found that total testosterone was once again not associated with lean mass or with hand grip strength in premenopausal females. Then we moved on to a longitudinal study design. So we had 35 premenopausal females at baseline, 27 completed a 12-week resistance training program, and they were not resistance trained. So before training, we looked at their physical activity and sleep. We looked at their protein intake. We took muscle biopsies, body composition scans, thigh muscle cross-sectional area scans, strength tested them, and took blood and urine. We then put them through a 12-week resistance training program where they trained 3 days per week. We took blood and urine every 2 weeks throughout the program, and then we repeated the exact same measures after the 12 weeks of training. So the first thing we wanted to do was look in a very, very, very tightly controlled manner, where we controlled for everything down to the phase of the menstrual cycle that these people were in, the time of day that we took the blood samples, because testosterone drops by 30% throughout the day. So in a really tightly controlled manner, can we replicate what we've already shown in that really large cohort study? So at baseline, was testosterone related to muscle mass or strength? And it wasn't. So the p-values on the right-hand side of the screen here show that it was nowhere near significant when we looked at testosterone against muscle mass, muscle strength, or muscle power in this cohort of 35 people. Then thought, okay, well, maybe it's not about taking a snapshot in time. Let's have a look at whether testosterone has more to do with how someone responds to resistance training. It's about your adaptability to resistance training. And again, there was no relationship at all. So this is now the changes in muscle size, strength, and power that occurred. And again, there was no relationship between testosterone and the changes in these outcomes. So together, this is suggesting that total testosterone is not directly associated with muscle mass, strength, or power in premenopausal females. What does this mean? Well, it means that these regulations might not be entirely valid because World Athletics is taking a blood sample from these women and essentially saying that you're not female enough, which is what the end point of this is that argument. And my research and research from others is suggesting that it's not about testosterone. So yeah, I think this figure sums up what testosterone is doing, the relationship between testosterone and muscle. So if you increase your testosterone above your natural baseline, you build more muscle than you lose, and you get a net increase in muscle mass. You get faster and stronger. On the other hand, if you suppress your testosterone to below your individual baseline, you break down more muscle than you build, and we get a net loss in muscle. However, at physiological concentrations, so when you are not manipulating your testosterone, it doesn't matter where your individual baseline is. If you're not manipulating it, we get no net loss or gain of muscle. And that's why testosterone is not a direct determinant of muscle mass or strength in this cohort. So where to from here? Because I've told you a lot of information, but there are a lot of questions still left. And the easy answer for me is I have no idea where to go from here. But there are a few steps that we need to take in order to have a better answer to this question. The first one, and I've said it a lot today, we need more research because we simply do not have enough evidence either way. So we need more good quality evidence in this space. But in saying that, we need open-mindedness, and this can be taken a few different ways. So we need to be open-minded with our research. We all have our internal biases, whether we're conscious of them or not. And as researchers, I'm sure we can all admit to, wanting a certain result, but we have to be open-minded in that you have to do your research in a very well-controlled manner and let the data tell you what is actually going on. We cannot put our own wants, biases, prejudices into our research. So we have to be open-minded. In saying that, we also have to be open-minded with conversations like this. The next thing is education. I think the biggest, most important thing in terms of getting rid of biases, getting rid of prejudice and bigotry is through education. So I think that's a really, really important step. And I also think an open, honest discourse as well. And this might mean having harder conversations or having conversations with people that don't necessarily agree with you. I know, you guys are here at a sex and gender equity presentation. I'm preaching to the choir about this stuff. We have to have conversations with people that don't necessarily agree with our research and our way of thinking, and have those open discussions. But I think all of these things feed into one another, and I think you can't have an honest discussion without being open-minded. So I think all of these things together will help us move forward with a better idea of where to go from here. So in saying that, these are my collaborators, and I thank you for the invitation to today, and thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I think it's very different to what we usually have here at SAGE, but it's just really, it's just one small piece of the puzzle around testosterone, I think, that's been, really focused on for quite a long time now. We're going to now talk to Jack, and we'll have some questions at the end for people. So if you could just hold out, you're welcome to put them in there, but you might have to remind me later. So without further ado.
Thanks, Adele, and thanks, Sarah. That was really, really informative, and I really enjoyed listening and being part of this discussion. I suppose my talk's going to be a lot different to Sarah's, but equally as important. Not really coming from a scientific biological sort of perspective. I'm coming more from a relational, lived experience perspective. Yeah, so as I said, I'm a social worker. I have worked predominantly in drug and alcohol for over 10 years. I established my own business last year, and that was really in response to the significant lack of culturally safe and affirming services for LGBTIQ plus folk in the Southeast Queensland region. Primarily the clients that I'm currently supporting are trans. And yeah, I'd have to say from my own personal experience, when it comes to sport and inclusion and physical activity, it's been quite a big protective factor for me as an individual. I did a lot of sport as a young person before I went on my medical affirmation journey. But then when I transitioned, I guess I did find that there was a different level of safety for someone who is trans, particularly when it comes to team sports. It's quite hard to find team sports that are inclusive of trans and gender diverse people. And I guess something that came to mind during Sarah's discussion is the inclusion of folk who have variations of sex characteristics, and also non-binary folk who are, oftentimes use the umbrella term trans as well. So yeah, just wondering, I suppose, where the inclusion for non-binary folk comes into this discussion as well when it comes to sport. We tend to have very binary ideas when it comes to sport and participation in sport. We don't see a lot of inclusion around folk who are non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid. Where are the spaces for those folk to kind of fit in as well? Yeah, I guess from working with folk in drug and alcohol, physical fitness and sport can be a real protective factor. It can be something that people utilize as like a new coping strategy, protective factor in their life. Yeah, and from my own experience using sport and fitness as a protective factor in my own life, something that comes to mind as a recent experience was the local gym that me and my partner joined. My partner's also trans. We joined a local gym hoping to improve our mental health. And yeah, I guess we experienced transphobia, homophobia. Yeah, and that was actually negating, I guess the reason that we went there for was to improve our mental health and our physical health, and found that it was hard to keep attending that gym. We spoke to the staff kind of did a couple of things like put a, all queer folk are safe here kind of sticker. It did kind of improve in some ways, but we have since stopped going there. It had really binary bathrooms, 2 levels. I always like to put a lens of intersectionality over things as well. It didn't have a wheelchair access bathroom. Yeah, it's always important to put a lens of intersectionality over anything that we're kind of talking about as well. Trans folk, First Nations, disabled, lots of different things. So it's really important to always, when we're talking about stuff, is put a lens of intersectionality over it. When I first started my gender affirmation journey with hormones, they discovered that my testosterone levels were actually very high. So I thought that was also important to raise. My partners were low. So yeah, it's all very different for all folk. Yeah, I'd really like to see more inclusion and safety when it comes to sport, particularly for young people coming through. I think that some places are doing it well. I think that we still have a long way to go, particularly in places like private schools. There's one person that stands out in my mind who I'm walking alongside at the moment, who is having a very hard time in the private school that they're attending when it comes to feeling safe and included in their authentic self and their gender identity. Yeah, so yeah, I think that having these conversations is really important in terms of moving forward. And yeah, I think that, you know, a lot of times we're looking at sports and fitness as, you know, the success and winning and performance, but how about we sort of look at it from community-based capacity building, sense of belonging, sense of community, improving the quality of a person's life. That's where it really means the most to me and has been the most influential in my life. I would really like to be someone who is involved in team sports, but haven't particularly felt safe to approach a sporting club. Yeah, just, you know, I think you can kind of get by if you're that person that doesn't want to disclose or be visible as a trans person in a binary setting with other males. But you always kind of feel like, oh, they're going to find out at some point, and then how do I navigate that? I've already built relationships. They're going to be fractured. I'm going to feel like, you know, I have to leave, you know. So yeah, it's really helpful to see that there is things happening in this space, and that there is a narrative that's starting around inclusion in sports for trans and non-binary folk. And I'd really like to be part of that conversation moving forward into the future.
Thank you so much, Jack. Yeah, it's just to share your experience as well, and to yeah, be, you know, vulnerable. So I'm really grateful that you were willing to come and share. And I know, yeah, from everybody who's here, these are the kinds of, you know, things that we do need to think about and reflect on, that lived experience as well. And I think what you said about, you know, there is this tension in sport between thinking about elite competition and, you know, winning and success, and then sport for just general well-being and participation. But sometimes, you know, the elite and performance side, they try to say that, well, no, sport is good for you. You know, that's why we need funding, because sport is so good for you and sport's good for your mental health. But these are not, that's not actually what they're focusing on. They're just using that rhetoric to boost them up, when at the end of the day, sport in the performance angle, it's, you know, it's just another high performance thing, really. So anyway, I'm sure elite athletes wouldn't think that, but, you know, who knows? I mean, I still would like sport, but it's just being a bit more, I guess, honest with the discourse about how they're what they're talking about. You know, it's not, the Olympics are not going to make people feel well-being, you know, like having inclusive spaces will. Okay. And now I can take questions from other people or comments. I think the questions that Sarah raised about what next and, you know, where to next are really important as well. And we've got a few comments there, but would people like to put up their hands and ask a question of anybody in particular? Michael.
Hey, Sarah, Jack, thanks for that. It was fantastic. Sarah, have you, I just in the edge of my mind, I read about Blair Hamilton's recent research, mainly because the gender criticals in the UK have already, you know, sort of abused it and said it wasn't matched population groups. Have you heard anything about that recent research?
No, I'm not aware of that research.
I can't even recall where it was published. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I might I'll certainly go and have a read of it after we get off this call.
But I think what your research, I'm really looking forward to when it comes out with the matched cohorts. I think that's going to be very incredibly useful in the battle for greater inclusion. So thanks for doing that, is what I'm going to say.
I was helping out on someone else's study, but I'll take it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Good to see you. Does anyone have any questions or things that they would like to add? Maybe what they're doing?
I actually just had one more thing that came to mind that I just wanted to share quickly, is that none of the clients that I'm actually walking alongside or have since I started this journey are engaged in any sporting teams or physical activity.
Yeah. And that says a lot, you know, and it's just, you know, it's a really affordable way to address your mental health, really. Sally. And then we've got Joe, Becky, Joe and then Becky.
Thanks, Adele, and kia ora, everyone from New Zealand. Just as question really for either of you, and thank you both so much for really fantastic presentations. And I'm just intrigued as to your thoughts on the CAS review in the UK and what that means for Sarah in your work. I noticed some of these sports organisations are talking about pre-puberty testosterone levels and all the rest of it. I'm just, it's just a top of the head kind of question. Sorry, it hasn't really got any shape to it, but if either of you have gotten to contribute on that, it would be interesting.
Jack, did you have any comments?
I haven't heard of that. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. It's the CAS report is a report to the UK Health Services blocking puberty blockers for children who are in NHS, National Health Service care, or private care in the UK. And it's caused a bit of stir, not surprisingly, overseas. I was just thinking of implications for that more generally in sport, but if it's not if it's not something you want to comment on, then, or not prepared or not ready for, then don't worry about it.
I think I have heard something about that just recently. I find it very hard to keep on top of all the different things. Sometimes I have to step away from a lot of the things in the media just for my own mental health, because it does become a little hard to navigate. But I do remember hearing something about that. So thanks for reminding me. I will follow that up and investigate that a little bit more once we finish this.
Thank you. We'll go to Joe.
Hey there. Not a question. And our club currently has done a lot of work in increasing female participation, so much that we're at about 44% of participants at the moment. So one thing that I've been pushing since I came into that role is to try to make the club as inclusive for gender diverse, non-binary participants as it is for our female participants. So one thing, I guess, it'd be great, and Jack, if possible, I might try contacting you offline just to get some advice in that space. But if there's one thing that clubs, particularly local community clubs, can do as a starter in that space, what would you suggest in terms of communicating that outwards? Because I think the issue that we might have is that people, like, how do we get those people to us?
I think it's hard to give an exact answer of how that process works, and I think that it's always very different. But having a group of people come and have a talk about it from the community, I think most of the time it's word of mouth through community. We're all very well connected, and if someone says this is a safe place, it tends to travel through the grapevine very quickly. But also you can publicly position yourself as a club as a safe space through media and promotion. It does tend to come with a bit of backlash, though. That's definitely something that I have found through my own experience of promotion of my own business, is that I'm constantly up against a lot of very hateful comments, which can be tricky. But if you learn on the socials how to navigate the comments and restricting certain people from commenting, it can make a world of difference. But yeah, I'm happy to talk with you privately about that if you'd like to discuss that a little bit further.
That would be fantastic. Thanks, Jack.
It's wonderful to have you here, Becky. And this is, who we want to connect with, people who are out there volunteering and working in sport so that they can get research translated through these forums. So
yeah, I think that's the case, is that a lot of the times you'll get people who just have no idea really what they're talking about in this space. So the notions that they have are kind of ill-informed, and I guess it's trying to, like you said, have open-minded discussions with these people. Yeah, bring everyone up to speed.
Great, thank you. Linda, your hand's up.
Adele, yes, just Becky, just wanted to comment that my faith community, they actually.
You're very quiet, Linda. Just
I'll try to talk louder. Maybe my microphone's not working very well. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. The faith community that I belong to, they always advertise on their pew sheet every week that they're gender inclusive. They've got all that on there. It's on their website, and they started doing that probably, I don't know, 5 years ago, and we don't have any problems with it, but we do have people that do turn up who feel very included. They're very pleased to read it. So I think having those statements, written on newsletters and Facebook and things like that can really.
Right. Anyone else would like to ask a question? Yeah, I just think having time for these conversations is important. Simone.
Thanks, Adele, and thanks to our amazing speakers today. That was really interesting. I'm just thinking about the resources that we currently have with this Sports Commission developing our transgender inclusion policies and practices, and how well they're being taken up or used by sport organisations and fitness organisations. And fitness is another kind of area altogether. It sits alongside but also outside the remit of the Sports Commission directly. But, these are all, there's a lot of resources out there, and I just wonder how, it is that issue of knowledge translation and policy implementation, and, what people's ideas are. And I'm thinking, Becky, your comments about, what is useful and what's helpful for addressing these very entrenched cultural attitudes that, often comes down to a couple of people to challenge. And that's, it's high burnout for LGBT plus community to deal with, and also people who are volunteers. So thoughts about that. It's just one of these ongoing challenges, I think, that researchers, all of us as researchers, are trying to grapple with, how we can do that more effectively and support good policy implementation.
I'm not really sure. I think I know exactly what you're talking about when it comes to the strategy that was rolled out, I think in 2019. Is that the one that you're speaking to? It sounds very thorough, and I'm also wondering the same thing. Are people not aware of the resources that are available to support these kind of policies sort of being rolled out into organisations, into schools, into sporting clubs? Yeah, I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure what the answer is, but I think having these conversations is definitely a starting point. I mean, I've, off my own back, had some ideas and applied for grants and not been successful. It is exhausting from someone from the community who's experiencing to have to feel like it's their job to kind of get these things up and running. And it's always such a powerful thing to have strong allies who are standing in solidarity, shouldering some of the burden that, and carrying some of the load. So yeah, I'm not really sure what to say about that, but I think having these conversations and spreading the narrative that it's something that's important and needs to be addressed, and the research to back it up is really important.
Thanks, Jack. Catherine, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the presentations. As I've put some little comments throughout in the chat. Sarah, I think that the graph that you've done where you've put the line for World Athletics is super powerful and should really be getting out there as much as possible. And if you did one for FINA and one for athletics and all the other ones as well, it would even look even more ridiculous. And so the fact that they're drawing their lines in a way that excludes some of the cis female population is extremely powerful, and kind of the point that we've been making from a policy perspective. I've put a note in there too that I've written on the FINA policy, this idea of having an other category, which I just think is ludicrous. And the AFL policy I've written on as well with Matt Nicol, just shout out for Matt, who I think is still on the line. We were really hopeful about the AFL policy, and I actually don't know whether it's working in practice. That's one of the things that I would like to do some follow up. I've been promoting the AFL approach because I think in theory it's a really good one. What they're supposedly doing is looking at the existing cohort of AFLW players and looking at what the normal range is for a whole bunch of different skills and attributes. So they're looking at how far can they hand pass, how high can they do standing jumps, how fast can they run over 5 meters, 500 meters. I think there was something like 90 different criteria that they looked at, which I just thought was a really interesting thing to do, to say, what does normal look like, particularly in a team sport environment where you want to have, big, strong players, little, tiny, fast ones. Team sport is inclusive. That's kind of the point. So there's plenty of room for everyone to come and play. And the AFL has adopted that approach and then said, well, let's test the person who's applying to come in, who is non-binary or is a trans woman or whatever, and then see, do they fit within the normal range, or do they in fact have a competitive advantage? So that's the key question. And whether there's a competitive advantage. So they're not interested in testosterone rates. They're not interested in, looking at singular hormone, and getting away from that, I think, is enormously positive. But just to Simone's point, which is just about the exhaustion felt by researchers and people working in this space, the cyberbullying is just intense. As soon as you put your head above the parapet and you say something as an ally or as a person who's deeply affected, then I just think the trolling pylon is just really overwhelming. And I've felt at times where I just have to pull back and say, I can't be involved right now. I need to go and do something else in order to recharge the batteries. And so one of the projects that we're doing with Sport Integrity Australia at the moment is looking at cyberbullying and how national sporting organisations can help support people, not just obviously on this topic, but anytime a woman does anything, dares to do anything in the sports space, she gets hammered, because how dare she have anything to do with sport, right? It's not her place. So if any of you have any ideas on how you think we could be better supporting women in the sports industry, women, all creatures great and small, including the intersectionality that you mentioned, Jack, too, thank you for doing that, then please send them through to me. I'd love to hear from you. I'm at the University of Canberra, and I'll put in my email address, so send me a note. I'd love to hear anybody who's doing it well. I'd love to hear.
Great to hear all of that work. We'll have one last, we've got Aaron and then Simone, and then we need to finish up. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, great presentations all around, and the personal stuff from you, Jack, was very touching. Building on Jack's comments on intersectionality, and then on Catherine. So as an athlete who lives with a physical disability, I had to undergo both state and then national classification. We had to compete in a field that's appropriate for my level and my capability. And I find that it's really quite interesting when it comes to talking about trans athletes, that the onus is put largely on the athlete themselves to prove where they are, what capability there is, rather than the systems of the sports themselves changing to have those analysis. And it was quite positive to hear from Catherine that the AFL is looking at doing something similar to that with this skills testing to make sure that people are judged on their ability, not just the amount of a chemical their body produces and where their state is at. And it's always been quite interesting to me that we ask that we challenge the athlete themselves versus this look at building the system changes around the sports and having those classifications. So people are competing in a perfect world somewhere down the street, down the end of the road, you'd have probably no need to worry about gender at all. You'd have people competing based on their skill level. But in current ways of things working, obviously we need to have those protections in place for people, both cis or trans, being able to compete in this spaces that are safe for them to do so. But this focus to move towards more on actual skills testing, we already see in places like just para-athletics or any other disabled sports, to make sure there is a fair competitive ground that people are competing on the level they can. So there's that sense of achievement that can be reached, so that I'm competing against people of the same level as myself. So if I do achieve something, I'm achieving because it's measured against people who are of equal skill level. But yeah, sorry, it was a bit rambly, but that's sort of, it was very positive to hear Catherine talking about the AFL moving in that general direction. But
thanks so much, Aaron. Simone, did you have one final comment before we wrap up?
And just a quick comment, yeah, to build on that, a couple of really interesting points, and I think it is about systemic change and how we start to think about flipping the way that we always individualise the problem to the athlete, and the challenge is changing cultural attitudes and systems, and really making that emotional labour and work that people are doing for change visible and part of what organisations need to be doing mainstream. And I also just got me thinking about, I wonder what role technology's got to play if we move down that line of thought around capability, because we know there are problems with disability para-classification because they're static, and people are changing and bodies are changing, and we don't know what bodies are capable of doing. And we've seen that with cis women in endurance sports beating men. There's various things that are going on across the sporting world, and I think that's the place to kind of be starting with. We don't know, and that coming back to Sarah's point about being open-minded and the way in which research opens up questions rather than just closing down definitive answers, because bodies are cultural as much as they're physiological. And that's the interesting question for us to understand, I think, moving forward. So thanks very much, everyone, for contributing.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, it's just been a really, really great conversation. And I think, very diverse perspectives from Sarah and Jack, but it just helps to open up this conversation because there's always that science elephant in the room, I think. And so I really appreciate you coming along, Sarah, and thank you so much, Jack, for your time and all of the work that you do in this space. If you wanted to connect with anyone and you didn't get their email, feel free to come through me and I can connect people. Otherwise, there's a lot in the chat there for people to follow up. So thanks for all your time and hope to see you at our book launch next month for Dr. Georgia Munro Cook. Invitation, I think, will be coming out shortly. Thank you.